Hi guys, thanks for joining me in another sewing tutorial video. Today we'll be looking at how to sew gathers. These are really important for sewing full skirts and making design features such as puff sleeves and ruffles. In this video I'll be showing you how to create full and beautiful gathers, and we'll be going through a few samples like how to gather a skirt and how to combine it with a dart. I hope you give this a try. Let's get started. A gathered seam has at least one side that has been eased in to create fullness. This is an essential sewing technique for creating fullness for skirts, puff sleeves, ruffles and many more. The fabric that you use must be light to medium for the best effect. A gathered seam is made between two pieces of fabric where one is significantly longer than the other. Here's what the pattern pieces generally look like. Typically, the area that needs to be gathered on the long side will be marked with two circle markings and a note to gather this side. The matching circle markings will be on the shorter side of the other piece. For nice gathers, the longer piece of fabric will have double the length for the area that needs to be gathered. First thing we need to do is transfer the markings to the fabric. Always start with nicely pressed pieces to ensure that you transfer the marking accurately and the seam is not wonky. Place the pattern pieces on the right side of the fabric. Pin into place. Push the pin into each circle marking. Remove the other pins so that you can fold back the pattern piece to the circle marking. Use your tailor's chalk to make a mark at the base of the pin. Do this for all of the circle markings. At your sewing machine, change the stitch length to the maximum on the straight stitch. Load a contrasting thread color into your machine. This helps us remove the temporary seams later. Now we start sewing the gathering stitches. Pull out at least 10 centimeters or 5 inches of thread out of the machine for both the upper thread and the bobbin. Take the long piece of fabric to be gathered and line up the needle with the marking that you made at 1/2 centimeter or 2/8 of an inch seam allowance. Place the foot on the fabric. Start sewing, but do not backstitch before or after you sew. Sew until you reach the marking at the other end and then finish sewing. Lift the foot and pull the fabric out of the machine. Cut the thread so that you leave a long tail. Now sew another line of gathering stitches at 1.3 centimeters or 4/8 of an inch seam allowance. These two gathering stitches are inside of the seam allowance, so they won't damage delicate fabrics like shears, silks and lace. Flip the fabric to the wrong side. Grab the bobbin threads for all the rows on one side with one hand. Hold them firmly as you use your other hand to gently move the fabric with your finger. The fabric will start to gather. Note that if one of the threads break, you'll have to re-sew the gathering stitch for that line. Once the fabric looks wavy, we can start lining it up with the other piece. Place the piece that you've gathered down on the other piece so that the right sides are together. The circle marking that you transferred needs to be together. You can line them up on a pin and then pin them into place. Now you'll need to adjust the gathers so that the two pieces are the same length. Increase or loosen the gathers as required. The two pieces need to be taut against one another. Knot two of the threads together to the base. Do the same for the other side. This will prevent the gathers from loosening as you sew. Now you can go ahead and redistribute the gathers. Gently run your fingers over the top of the gathers until the puckering is evenly spaced. Now you can go ahead and pin the two pieces together. At your sewing machine, change the stitch length back to normal and use a matching thread color. Start sewing at 1.5 centimeters seam allowance. Be sure to back tack by stitching forward, backwards, then forwards again for a few stitches each time. This prevents your final seam from unraveling. Grab your quick unpick and you can now unpick all of the gathering stitches on the wrong side. Now to press the seam, at your ironing board, open up the seam so that the wrong side is facing up. The seam allowance is ironed towards the flat side with the gathers. Just press the iron on top of the seam and not the gathered side of the fabric so you don't create creases in the fabric. Now you can go ahead and finish the seam. Overlock the raw edges together. And we're all done! We have some nice puffy gathers on one side and they're nice and even. The circle marking in this example is 1.5 centimeters from the end, so there will be no gathering inside the next seam. Let's see some examples on how to use gathers. Today I'm sewing Butterick's B6784, which has gathers in key seams including the skirts and darts. One of the most common ways to use gathers is for a full gathered skirt at a waistline seam. I have sewn up a skirt here and all the seams are complete. I prefer to sew the gathering stitches just before they're used as it lets me get as close as possible to the skirt seams. The end of the skirt will be sewn into a zipper, so I'm going to make a marking at 1.5 centimeters from the end of the top edge. This marking will be where I stop and start sewing. Change your stitch length to the maximum on the straight stitch and pull out a long tail of thread before and after you sew. At 0.5 centimeter seam allowance, start sewing on the circle marking and make sure you don't backstitch. Finish sewing at the skirt seam. Use your hand wheel to get as close as possible for the last stitches. Repeat the next line of gathering stitches at 1.3 centimeters seam allowance. Now I'm going to repeat this process for each panel on the skirt. If your skirt panels are very wide, then you can sew the gathers for half the skirt. Now I'm going to go ahead and gather the skirt, just enough to make it easier to match up with the bodice. I have my bodice on the table with the right side facing up. Place the skirt on top of the bodice so that the right sides and the raw edges are together. Now line up all the markings and align all the seams. Pin into place. Adjust the gathers so that they are tight against the bodice. Then tie each of the threads together. Spread out the gathers so that they're even. The gathers are all ready, so you can go ahead and pin the seam. Sew the waist seam at 1.5 centimeters seam allowance. If your waist seam is thick, then I would recommend sewing another seam at 1.3 centimeters or 4/8 of an inch seam allowance to reinforce it. You can go ahead and unpick all the gathering stitches from the wrong side. Lastly, I'm going to overlock the raw edges together. Press the seam towards the bodice. The gathered skirt is all complete and ready for the zipper. The final skirt is very full and the gathers are even all around. For the next example, I'll be showing you how to combine gathers with a dart. For the bodice of this dress, the centre front has a cutout with a dart which is gathered towards the side. The longer side is gathered. I've already transferred the line for the dart onto the fabric. We sew from the bottom at 1.5 centimeters, then follow the dart lines to taper into the dart. For a full explanation on how to sew darts, please refer to my previous sewing video. I've changed the stitch length to the maximum and I'm pulling out a long tail of thread out of the machine. I want the gathers to go to the tip of the dart, so I'm going to sew the gathering stitches under the dart line. Now I'm going to go ahead and sew the gathering stitches at 0.5 centimeter and 1.3 centimeters seam allowance. I'm going to go ahead and gather each side of the dart to approximately the same length. To check, I'm going to fold the bodice in half through the circle marking and bring the raw edges together. I'm going to finish adjusting the gathers so that both sides have the same length, then knot the threads together. Push the gathers around so that they're even. Now I can go ahead and pin and align the dart lines. I'm pushing a pin through both of the lines to match them up. Then I'm going to pin the fabric flat. At the sewing machine, I'm going to start sewing at the base at 1.5 centimeters all the way up to where the pattern marking is for the dart. Now I can sew directly on the dart line and finish the rest of the dart. Do not backstitch and leave a long tail of thread after you sew. Hand knot the end of the dart. I'm going to unpick the gathering stitches. Iron the seam towards the center like you would with a dart. Finish the raw edges. Bodice gathers are great for creating shaping around curves. Thanks for joining me in today's sewing tutorial video. Today we learned how to make easy and even gathers. I hope you'll give this a try next time you make a skirt, or any other sewing project that involves gathers. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching!